Welcome to Wisdom, Wealth, and Wellness. I'm your guest host, Jonathan Satovsky of Satovsky Asset Management. And today I'm so psyched to be here with David McWilliams, not McWilliams, McWilliams, who's actually the 10th most influential economist in the world. He's written 4 bestsellers, presented award-winning documentaries, even brought in economics to the stage in Ireland's Abbey Theatre. On social media, he's the 3rd most widely followed economist in the world, with over 333,000 Twitter followers at David MCW. With a distinguished career spanning over 2 decades, he's been recognized as Ireland's Economist of the Year and as regular contributor to major international publications as the Financial Times and the Economist. And I'm just psyched that you're not at the bar in Dublin at 6 o'clock.
It's a terrible shame because, as you can see from the background, it's dark out here. It's still early February. You know, there's no good reason to be inside on your Todd. You should actually be well ensconced at this side. And it's a Wednesday afternoon, so the weekend's half over, you know. So all is good. How are you, John? Good to see you.
Excellent. Listen, I happen to meet you at your Dalkey Book Festival, and it is an honor to meet you because I guess I'll start. This is an unconventional start, but how did the Dalkey Book Festival start? Because you're an economist, you deal in comedy, you've traveled the world, but I always respect people who like to read and think, and you're building a community, bringing some really cool people together to talk about topics, to elevate people's consciousness and awareness of topics well beyond economics, politics, and just awareness of the globe. It's cool. I just would love to hear the history.
Thank you so much.
That started.
Well, John, the Dalkey Book Festival, first of all, my grandparents migrated into Ireland from Scotland, thus the name McWilliams, which is very, very Scottish. And my grandfather was a painter and decorator. My grandfather and grandparents were what they called a mixed marriage in Scotland. Scotland was a very sectarian place, and Protestants and Catholics didn't mix. And believe it or not, back then, at the turn of the century, Ireland and Dublin was regarded as a very tolerant place, or more tolerant place than Glasgow. So they came down here, and I think some of my family were in the British Navy, which would have been very typical of, you know, working class Scottish and Irish men at the time. It was a good job. You got well paid. You got paid every week. And they were stationed just here beside me here in a place called Dunleary, which is about 2 miles from Dalkey. And I think my grandfather's cousins who were in the Navy said, look, up the road, there's a reasonably swanky village, and there will be a lot of admirals and top brass of the Navy stationed there. They will have big houses. There'll be lots of work for a painter and decorator, and you can go up there and do your thing. So my family have been there for, 2, going on 3 generations now. And my dad was born there, lovely little place. He founded the local football team. So there was a little bit of a sort of vocational side to our family. And I was brought up there, and it's a small little village, a couple of thousand maximum, even in the surrounding area. But it is and has an extraordinary literary pedigree. So, for example, George Bernard Shaw was born there and lived there in his teenage years. James Joyce located the school in Ulysses there. Samuel Beckett actually taught there. So it was a huge pedigree. And during the post-2008 crash, which Ireland suffered very, very significantly from, a couple of the traders in the village said to me, or in the town, depending, it's like everything. If you're a townie, you call it a town. If you're a blow-in, you call it a village. So the people in the town said to me, look, David, you're writing all the time. The newspapers, I had a column in the major newspaper about an economics column. And they said, could you write about the fact that we are going out of business, that people aren't shopping in the town, they're shopping in the out-of-town supermarkets. It's a story Americans know very, very well. It's a story that's been played out in many, many towns in the United States. And maybe you can encourage people to shop local, because if you really want a local town that is a thriving ecosystem with shops and bars and restaurants and a whole panoply of activity, you need people, you need footfall. So I wrote about it. And I came home, and Shan, my wife, said, well, what did you write about this week? And I said, I wrote about this thing about Dalkey. And she said, yeah, it's okay, you're writing about it, but hold on a second. If you just write about it, you're the problem, okay? Why don't we do something about it? So literally we were at this kitchen table that I'm doing this podcast interview with you now. And we said, look, what can we do for the community to attract in people, to generate a buzz, to generate some hype around the town? And Shan said, look, you know lots of journalists, you know a good few writers. Maeve Binchy who passed away about 10 odd years ago, was still alive and was in the town. And she's a very, very famous writer. We knew a couple more, Joe O'Connor, who would be a very well-known Irish writer. And she said, look, why don't you ring up Joe and Maeve? And I rang up Maeve and she said, look, Dave, that's a great idea. Let's start small. And we did. So we started, we sold about 800 tickets the first year and we sold 22,000 last year. So it's a huge thing now. It's a beast of a thing. And just so it started really as a kitchen sink discussion, probably with too much red wine, thinking it was a great idea. And that was 14 years ago. We're now into our 15th year. And it's grown and grown and grown. And it's a lovely thing to do because when you're from a place, it's always nice to do something and give something back and see the town in a different light. And we brought in all sorts of things. So like even last year you were there. So Tom Hanks headlined the show. So we've gone from a very small gig to a sort of a big international festival. It's now the biggest literary festival in Ireland. Our media partner is the Financial Times Weekend, our global partner. So it's kind of taken off.
I think Bono was one of the speakers too, if I'm not mistaken.
Bono was one of the speakers.
Amazing.
He was talking about his really brilliant book Surrender, which he published last year, his biography and his autobiography, obviously. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful, and he's an amazing person. He's got an amazing mind, amazing grasp of the world. And he has always been, and this is very important, small festivals need big supporters. Okay, yeah. That's the rule. And he has always been a very, very big supporter of the festival. And he understands, because he's in the entertainment business, how difficult it is to sustain a festival, let alone get it up and running, but sustain it. And the fact that you do need every now and then a little bit of stardust, a little bit of celebrity, a little bit of Hollywood, just to sprinkle that little bit of dust over the gig. And that's what we try to do.
It's awesome. If any of the listeners have an opportunity, not just for the stardust, but for the other speakers who are absolutely mind-blowing, I would highly recommend it. But it's also
the Dalkey Book Festival.org. So just we'll big it up. The Dalkey Book Festival.org. That's DALKEY. Sorry, go for it, John.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think more than half of adults, 51%, haven't read a full book in over a year. 22% of adults haven't read a book in over 3 years, and 10% haven't read a book in more than 10 years via World Rated. So it's just a brilliant thing on the level of what you said about bringing the community and giving back. And I'm sure it's had a meaningful impact to your family and your community well beyond what you anticipated when you started.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. It has a huge impact. And I mean, I suppose in terms of the range of topics, what's interesting, and I'm sure it's the same for your own podcasting, is that, the inquiring mind, the curious mind is into economics, they're into philosophy, they're into history, they're into science, they're into big politics, they're into small politics, they're into romance, they're into tragedy, they're into theatre. So what we try to do is we bring all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life. They're not just novelists. They are journalists. They are thinkers. They are, young and old, urban and rural, male and female, gay and straight. We put them all together in a big stew and you turn the heat up, and amazing things happen.
It's awesome. All right, so now let's go back to your roots, a little bit back about your history, so people want to know why you're so amazing. You had experience both working for the central bank in Ireland. You've lived in Israel. You've lived in the UK. You've lived all over. What has shaped your economic philosophy and your understanding of the global landscape of how things unfold, and perhaps have the lens of living in different places opened up your eyes in a different way than you would have just staying in Dalkey for 50, 60 years like many of your peers.
But I think that my generation of Irish folk were made for export. So we're born in the late 1960s. We are born into a very troubled country, a very poor country by comparative standards, but increasingly a very educated country. So Ireland we tried to educate the people as much as possible. And then by the 70s into the 80s, when I was a teenager, I first of all went to the United States. I worked like almost every Irish kid in a bar in Boston. I worked in bars in New York. I was a dishwasher on Bleecker Street for a good few months. I enjoyed it tremendously because New York was to us like going to the moon. Like it was like a totally different place. So we came from Dublin. We didn't even have any skyscrapers, let alone New York style skyscrapers. So we didn't have any cosmopolitan backdrop. Where we were very white. We were very Christian. All that sort of stuff. And the United States for us was the future. Actually, it was the future. So we were came of age in the 70s. In the 80s. Went to university, late 80s, by which Ireland had was experiencing its fourth recession since independence. So we came out unemployment was 17, 18%. And I decided to go and do a master's in Belgium, to go to the continent, to do it in a different language, all that sort of carry on. And then I came home to work in the central bank. So back then, the only job that young graduate or postgraduate economists could get, or if you were into economics, was in the central bank. That was the kind of holy of holies. It was like working in your Fed, and you started in research. And very soon, I suppose, John, it's fair to say, although I was interested intellectually and academically and all that sort of stuff, I kind of realized, man, this is not for me. This sitting in the same building for the next 40 years, I don't get it. My poor mother, of course, who would have been over the moon because I'd got a job that was permanent and pensionable, and I could take my 4 weeks holidays a year and never get fired. And I kind of came home to her and I said, I don't know, Mum, this isn't for me. And she said, well, what are you going to do? What's better? And I went over to London and got a job in one of the big investment banks, a place called UBS, probably the largest bank in Europe at the time, the Union Bank of Switzerland. And because I'd gone to Russia in the intervening period to learn Russian, I had the very strange notion when the wall came down that the world would be increasingly a massive demand for Russian-speaking Irish economists. So we were a small niche, but I thought our future was copper-bottomed. But that turned out to be quite interesting because UBS had many economists at the time, but they had nobody who'd kind of vaguely said, well, yeah, I'll go to Russia. I don't mind. I'll go there. And I could speak a bit of the language. I enjoyed the culture. I was an adventurous kid, and away I went. So I lived there for a while, and then I came back, and it was very clear to the economics team that I was the one with itchy feet. They sent me to Israel to live for a year, and I lived in Ramat Gan. I lived in a bizarre apartment block full of Iraqi Jews. I never knew there were Jews in Iraq. I didn't know there's Mizrahi Jews. I lived there for the guts of a year. Then I came back. Then I was sent to Serbia. All these, basically any country that was in a vague crisis, I was sent there. And I enjoyed it tremendously. It was a great learning curve as a young man. It was a wonderful experience. You get exposed to an extraordinary amount of wisdom, an extraordinary amount of varying angles, people with very discreet, people with very generous opinions, people with different opinions. And I suppose that simply animated my enjoyment of travel and of learning about the world, and also kind of interpersonal relationships. Actually, a friend of mine said to me, some people collect stamps, David, you collect friends and you don't lose them. But I think that creates a very full life. And that then has allowed me in the festivals I do to invite people who are friends and who are people that I want to see. And they can be from Argentina, from all around the world. And I suppose that I just decided that we're only on this earth for, we've got one shot here, and you might as well do the best you can and have a bit of fun doing it. So that's really been it. So I've kind of went from having the most secure job in the world, which is an economist at the Fed, to the most insecure job in the world, which is a podcaster. Okay. And over those 3 decades, I've had a lot of fun.
That's amazing. So you bring up Argentina, and obviously there was a new election. You've talked in several of your podcasts about Milei coming in, and we're in a political year of elections in the United States. And you've actually been pretty consistent about your forecasts. You've been accurate in your forecasts about economic outlooks, which is rare, because I generally think that that economists are like meteorologists.
Give meteorologists a good name.
Yeah, they give meteorologists a good name. So how do you feel about forecasting the global shape of politics and their impact on elections and global money flows? Or do you think that demographics has a greater play? What is your take?
Well, actually, I think both have enormous play. I mean, you mentioned Milei in Argentina. Argentina is a country I know quite well. I've been down there quite a few times. I enjoy it tremendously, but I feel a terrible compassion for Argentinian people. And I know if you're born in a poor country, as I was, right, and you hold on and say, you think like, we're not so stupid. We're not any more dumb than people from Connecticut. You know, when I was an Irish kid, I was an illegal dishwasher, right? I had a maths degree, but I couldn't get a job. Yeah. And I was working with American kids, right? And they were all front of house because they were Americans. And we were back in the kitchens. We were steaming in the kitchens. And I remember thinking to myself, we're not so dumb. You know, they're not any more talented than me, but I'm here and I'm illegal in their country. And they're over here and they're fine. And the problem I concluded was management, was how do you manage yourselves, right? How do you organize yourself? So when I go to Argentina, you know, these are the most empathetic people in the world. They are literary, they are brilliant, they are funny, they are humane beyond belief. And yet the country has gone from the 4th richest in the world to, I think it's beyond the 100 richest now. So that means that the people are traumatized. And I think we forget that whole cultures can become traumatized by bad management. And eventually, if you're traumatized, you make decisions that from the outside world look a bit bizarre, but from your own standpoint, make loads of internal sense. And I think that's what's happened with the election of Milei. You know, a lot of us Europeans who are actually sitting from the vantage point of great privilege, great privilege. I mean, we know it is a fact that Western Europeans born in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s are the most lucky people in the world ever, because we have much greater lifespan than anybody else. We have much greater health, we have much greater wealth, we have much greater education than any humans who ever lived. So we are the gilded people of the world, people from Northwestern Europe, right? So therefore, we have to, when we look at the world, we have to, in some way, get out of our own bodies, get out of our own comfort zones and see, you know, other countries haven't had the luxury that we have had. We've had no wars because America has protected us. We've had cheap oil from Russia, so we've had no real energy crises in 50 years. We had China opened up to take our manufacturing exports not so long ago, so we've had a massive stimulus from Asia. And when we ran out of labor, we had migrants coming from Africa, migrants coming from other places. So, you know, Europeans are the gilded folk, yet Argentinians aren't. So to answer your question, you always have to understand, I think, or try to get inside the head of the average person living in Rosario or Cordoba or Mendoza to see what is going on in their world. Yeah. And then I think the big flows, I mean, demography is destiny. We know that. And we know that countries, and again, maybe because I'm Irish, I understand, you know, we had a population of 8 million in 1841. That population dropped to just over 2 million by 1945, 1950, right? So we've had the opposite demographic history of most races. So demography for us is everything because we are the outlier. We are the Malthusian outlier. When Malthus said that they were going to die because they were all dependent on one plant, he was talking about us, right? And that's what happened to us. So if you look at demography, it's really crucial. And again, you know, I'll give you one statistic. There were more babies born in Nigeria last year, Nigeria, one country in Africa, than in the entire continent of Europe, including Russia. So that's going from here in the West, in Ireland, all the way to Vladivostok. So more babies born in Nigeria than in the entire continent of Europe. It's extraordinary.
So does that
and that's what's going to change the world.
Would that bode well for, because I saw like, you know, the 8 billion people on the planet, if you divide it by continents, you know, the Americas, Europe, Asia, Africa, you know, Australia, whatever, that boom of population growth in Africa is dwarfing the rest of the world. So does that bode for a vibrancy in Africa? Obviously, most people feel like it's too corrupt and like, question. I don't know if I want to invest there. You know, like it's dicey. It doesn't have the same maybe you said, management or governance that makes it more uninvestable, even though they have really favorable demographic trends, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the very interesting thing. It's not just demography. It's never just demography.
Yeah.
Demography gives you the wherewithal
Yeah.
to grow, but it's never just demography. And of course, if you have too many people and not enough organization, not enough wealth, GDP per head will fall. I mean, in fact, the entire history of humanity, when you even go in all the way back, there's a series, believe it or not, called the Madison data series, which gives you GDP figures all the way back to the Romans, and they're reasonably accurate.
Yeah.
And what you see is basically that, the world was caught in what they call a Malthusian trap for millennia, which is that population grew, GDP per head never grew because we couldn't actually sustain them. There's no reason in the 21st century that Africa will experience that. In fact, one should hope not,
Right.
but you can't rule it out, and so you get this massive demographic surge from Africa. What happens if they can't actually, not only if they can't deploy capital to allow the people a decent standard of living, well, then they're going to move, and they're going to move to Europe. And that's, I suppose, one of the big trends out there, which is the politics of migration. You have them in the United States, I think this is one of Trump's main cards, isn't it? The wall and Mexico and Central America and all that sort of stuff. The politics of migration is the politics of the next 10 years in the developed world, and we're going to have to deal with it in some way.
Again, this is a naive American statement, but when Brexit happened, I felt like part of the argument for Brexit was because of immigration policy in Europe, but that may not be accurate, because I think, listening to one of your recent podcasts on Brexit, actually there has been a tremendous amount of immigration into Britain. So
the UK,
the opposite of what they expected.
Right.
Yeah, the opposite. Oh, we're going to reduce immigration problems, but actually it ended up increasing problems. So
it increased problems because they kicked out the very productive Poles and Czechs and all those people, and then they realized, my God, we got nobody to work in the health service. We got nobody to work to drive the ambulances, to drive the buses, to wait on tables, to all that sort of stuff.
So do you have a perspective on it? I wonder, it's hard to collaborate, right? For Britain, forgive me for getting into politics, because you're not supposed to talk about sex or politics, I suppose, but
you have to talk about sex or politics. In fact, there's nothing else to talk about.
That's true. Money, sex, or politics you're not supposed to talk about. We'll talk about all of them today.
Yeah.
But,
all of them. Yeah.
But it's hard to collaborate, whether it's, the divorce rate in the world, 50%, like having a partner. And as I wonder what your thoughts about Britain eventually capitulating and saying, you know what, we thought we can go it alone. Maybe we're better off playing along and getting part of the EU and getting back into the fold with everyone, so we can all just get along, and really for the benefit of everyone on the continent. I wonder whether you think that it's actually at some point going to be in the cards, and if not,
I don't know.
Yeah,
go on.
No. I just curious. If not, I suppose, to your point, the election cycle of understanding it from the perspective of the people in the economy. Why do people flip-flop from wanting to go, okay, well, that doesn't work, let me go try the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and how it sort of reconciles,
Yeah, the British one is a tricky thing, because they're our closest neighbours, okay? We share a border on our island, constitutionally with Britain. We know them very, very well. It's always the thing, and the difference between big countries and small countries is that we know everything about them. They know nothing about us. It's a bit like you and the Canadians. They know everything about you, but you guys know very little about them, or you and the Mexicans, right? So we follow English football teams. We listen to the BBC. Well, we don't really anymore, because it's not particularly good, but it used to be very good. Yeah. We listen to British music, all that. So we know them, and we all spend many years over there working. I think what really amazed me about Britain during the Brexit debate and the subsequent negotiations was this very bizarre combination on the part of the Brexit people, the people who are supporting Brexit, of extraordinary self-regard twinned with victimhood. So They both thought they could do anything, and on the other hand, they thought they were victims. And these are two very, very, and you know this from meditation, you know this from thinking about how we position ourselves in the world. These are two very, very corrosive human traits. So one is an excessive narcissism about your abilities, right? Which is, we know, an appalling trait. And the other one is an obsessive victimhood that everyone's against you. Like, as my mother said, choose. What are you going to be? Do you want to be a narcissist or a victim? You can't be both, right? And you see this playing out in the United States and certain politics too. That combination is very unstable. That's the first thing. The second thing is nostalgia is a very dangerous political card to play.
Yeah.
So you have "Make America Great Again," right? Now, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
What it means is that there's an invented America, maybe 1950s, maybe a sort of out of the first season of Mad Men. That's what they're appealing to. Okay, the United Kingdom. So the same thing was like, we can go back to some sort of imperial past. Well, you can't, because what happened was the people who revolted against you, you know, they did it for a reason. So I think Britain has to find its way. I think it will. I think a country of 60 million people with the industrial, intellectual capital of Britain, with their general good humor, their general sense of the world, they'll be fine. They're just going through a phase. It's like a teenager going through a drug phase, right? Everyone does it, and everyone comes out the far side, or most come out the far side. Well, and I think that's what they're doing.
That's actually, in psychology class, they say, whatever your child is like at 12 is what they're going to be like at 22. But between then, look out. You know, it could be,
exactly.
Who knows what they're going to experience.
Exactly.
So just toggling a little bit to your storytelling about economics. I find whether it's your book festival or your podcast, I find that the way you tell stories really helps bring economics to life. And maybe you could talk a little bit about, I think you also co-founded the world's only economics festival, Kilkenomics. It's an elective combination of economics, stand-up comedy, described as the Financial Times as the best economics conference in the world, and maybe more accurately by the Australian as Davos without the hookers. How do you think that? How do you think to pair economics with comedy?
We actually nearly got sued by Davos for that title, and it was the Australian, the Aussies came up with it. So no, because I've always, look, you know, we all know that humor is the great leveler, right? We also know, if you've spent any time with them, that stand-up comedians are the most intelligent people in the world, right? So you have these extraordinary people, stand-up comedians, who can see the world in a different way. And they deploy humor, which is the sort of opener for every conversation. So many years ago, I did a one-man show in the Abbey, which is our national theatre, during the crash and during the crisis. And they asked me to come in and explain, you know, do a one-man show, explain to the people what was going on. And it was great, and it went very well, and the houses were full, and it was wonderful. But a friend of mine, or a couple of friends of mine, who are stand-up comedians, who were in school with me and who were in college with me, they said, look, you know, Macker, maybe there's something in this, you know, because you're deploying humor and whatever. What about using the stage to explain economics? And I said, how do you mean? They said, look, maybe there's something in this idea of fusing what you're doing, you know, humor and economics. And so what you do realize is, once you meet stand-up comedians, you might fancy yourself as a funny guy conversationally, but when you meet a really funny person, you realize, no, they're really funny. They have what we call in English funny bones, right? Their bones are just funny. Yeah. So what we did, we started this festival, and again, it grew from it was a very small acorn, and it has grown into an enormous tree at this stage, and it's now the biggest economics festival in the world. We did 12,000 tickets last November, and it's in the middle of nowhere. It's in Kilkenny, which is, so you really have to come, you have to commit. It's like a pilgrimage. And so like Paul Krugman came last year, Nobel Prize winner. So we get all these huge economists to come from the United States. And what they're intrigued by is this sort of combination of economics and stand-up comedy. And, you know, storytelling, you know, as I've always said, you never, ever, ever tried to put a child to sleep by teaching them algebra. You put kids to sleep by telling them stories. There's somewhere in our primeval head that our great, 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 great grandfathers, our ancestors, our hunter-gatherers, imagine we all come from the same place, although many people in the world are trying to claim we don't. And imagine over the tens of thousands of years how many mothers and sisters and fathers quietened their children through stories and explained the world through stories. And we're just a couple of evolutionary steps away from them. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, stories are how we open up the world to each other. It's how we make moral decisions. It's how we know right from wrong, And I think that one of the dilemmas for economics was that economics was taken over, hijacked by very bad mathematicians in the 1950s, right? And they thought, oh my God, math sounds really hard. We want to be hard as well. So we constructed this entire fabrication of how humanity behaves around the idea of rationality. And we know, you and I know, that humans are not only not rational, we are perfectly irrational. And that makes us beautiful. It's the irrationality that makes us human. We fall in love. We do, this time it's going to be different. You're in the markets. How many people got caught in one boom only to get caught in the second boom bust, So that's our nature as this crazy social animal that we are, is defined by a variety of human traits, one of which is profound, pathetic, and yet beautiful irrationality. And economists tried to take that person and tried to pretend we were something else. I always think it's like we are Captain Kirk, but economists tried to turn us into Mr. Spock, right? Into a Vulcan with no feelings, no emotions, with an analytical brain and ability to see data, when in actual fact, we're Captain Kirk. That's who we are. And that's a reference that dates me. That's a reference of a mid-50s man to science fiction from the 1980s and 70s.
It's great.
So the storytelling is an essential part of our human need to communicate and to persuade and to agitate and to inform, to educate, and to a degree to spread the word. And that's what, if you think of religions, what is it? It's only a series of great stories, great yarns, and the person with the best story wins.
You said about nostalgic, we'll call it, I would call it nostalgic dementia or memory loss, because in the late 40s, early 50s, when you said it was such a great time in America, there could not have been more pessimism in America. Actually, on the ground, yes. Boots on the ground, people were actually not enjoying it. They were all stressed out and pessimistic. Similar how, looking back from an analytic brain, you would say post-financial crisis, it was the greatest of times, but people were stressed to the Jesus. People weren't saying, oh my God, this is the greatest of times. They're all stressed. So but the storytelling, it reminds me of Schoolhouse Rocks, which is the videos that taught people about math and economics and how a bill, became a law. There was a kid who couldn't learn traditionally in school, but he was great with musical memory. So the father, who was an ad guy, created this whole music video series to be able to help his kid memorize that. It was really cool.
Yeah, well, but that's how my daughter, who's just come in here, and she's in a band. She's the lead singer. She writes all the music. She's dyslexic. She couldn't stand school. She was like, what the hell's going on? But you give her the piano, you give her voice, you give her music, and she can tell you the best story in the world. And she's, she's doing her thing. And so I find that all you've got to do is look out at the world and see the extraordinary talent and genius that's out there, and all the amazing little brains that are sparking up and have different sort of attitudes and different types of things that turn them on, right? And that's the beauty of humanity. So I teach it in the university here in Trinity. And, when I go in, I am always trying to figure out, okay, what's going on in the heads of these young people, these young men and women, their early 20s. And what you find is if you can find that and they connect with that, there is a magic moment where the light goes on, the penny drops, and the group can achieve anything educationally and intellectually. And then that's, I suppose, where most of us who are in the business of communicating or teaching or whatever you happen to think it is, talking or explaining, or That's the eureka moment.
And
that happens.
I love it. That's what gives me optimism about the future, that the enduring human spirit of adaptability and ingenuity and innovation is trying to stay young is what's going to keep moving things forward. Anyway, it's been awesome.
Yeah, sure.
I can't believe we're out of time, but tell us how people can find you. I mean, you have so many amazing things going on between ChFC, Dalkey Festival, the podcast. Like, how do people find you?
So the podcast is the David McWilliams podcast. You'll find it on all podcast platforms. And the basic idea is to try, and I've always said, what is difficult is never that important, and what is important is never that difficult. So that's the idea. I'm on David McW on Twitter, or X, now we should call it, formerly known as Twitter, like Prince. I'm bothering around. If you're interested in economics and stand-up comedy, it's kilconomics.com. And if you're interested in literature and art and all that sort of stuff, it's Dalkey, DALKEY, bookfestival.org. And you can find us there.
Awesome. Well, it's really been a pleasure. I'm going to try to make my way back to Dalkey, and I'll try to make my way to the Kilconomics. Who can't use a little humor? I was told you're supposed to laugh every day and get moved to tears. So anyway, subscribe to
stuff.
Wisdom, Wealth, and Wellness, wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube. And all the links are at satovsky.com/podcast. Thanks again, David.
Cheers, John. Absolute pleasure.
See you in New York.
Satovsky Asset Management, hyper-personalized wealth management that has created joy and abundance since 2007.